Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the City Bar Association. We're delighted to have you here this morning. My name is Deborah Raskin, and I'm president of this wonderful organization that has a history of bringing together the best lawyers in the New York metropolitan area together with other professionals to work on important legal and social issues affecting our city. And there could hardly be a more important issue than the one you are discussing today. I'm so pleased to be able to open today's program on opportunities to raise awareness about climate change. It's not only the most significant environmental issue facing the world community today, but it's an issue very specifically affecting New York City through more intense storms like Superstorm Sandy and through longer heat waves and other aspects of environmental change that are happening right under our noses. Climate change, though, is not merely an environmental issue that can be left to environmentalists or scientists, but it's a human issue that affects every New Yorker in every way of life. And these environmental and public health effects will disproportionately have a negative impact on the poor, the young, on our older population, on folks with disabilities, the most vulnerable among us, which is why we have to fight so hard.
So I'm an economist who lives among scientists every day at the Earth Institute. And I don't know what you would think of colleagues who come up to you every day to say, it's worse than we thought. But that's been my life for the last 15 years. And that's what I'm trying to convey to you. So we require a forward-looking action that stretches out over 30 or 40 years. Wall Street, unfortunately, has a time span of nanoseconds right now. Traders, not planners, not long-term industrial financiers. Our politicians have a time span at the length of a soundbite on a morning show. But we have a problem that requires concerted action stretched out over 40 or 50 years. We have to reintroduce a term that's almost an evil term in the American lexicon, planning. We actually have to plan. We have to plan locally, we have to plan regionally, we have to plan globally.
So we recently did a review of the behavioral sciences to try and distill the insights around this cognitive relationship. And we found a couple of major things. So first of all, we have a hard time as humans to understand the future. I agree it's essential to think about 30, 50-year timelines. That is actually pretty difficult for us, not just politically, but actually psychologically. So climate change is seen as distant in time and distant in space. Now, this is a major thing happening somewhere in the sky because of invisible gases with complex dynamics, and the impacts are big, but there's a lot of uncertainty, and they're happening over enormous timescales. And this is how we've tried to communicate that message. Lots of smart people, lots of good information. Maybe this smart person in particular, a highly politicized figure, or with this traditional emblem of the climate change issue. Very few people have direct experience of polar bears. This is how people experience climate change. This is the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy. Climate change impacts people's lives. It threatens their livelihoods and things they care about. People experience climate change through extreme weather, through hunger, through immigration, through threats to public health.
And those two things are the feeling that we can all have of strength in numbers. We're all feeling it right now in this room. And the feeling that we've all had on multiple occasions, some of them with great outcomes and some of them with embarrassing outcomes, of a self-fulfilling prophecy about our own capacity and behavior. And so the idea of collective efficacy is those two things wrapped together. It's essentially, in its positive form, the self-fulfilling prophecy that's brought us massive changes to systems that seemed very complex, to some people distant, and impossible to change.
Here we are in New York, the media capital of the world, and as you saw from the Yale data, Americans are only exposed to a story about climate change about once a month. Now, this is a terrible failure of our media. You know, the way people learn things is through repetition. So if we're only exposing them to something about this once a month, they're not going to learn, and they're certainly not going to understand how urgent this situation is. This is an emergency, and in a sense, Paul Revere has yet to ride to proclaim the emergency. Look at the figures. The American public, only 46% of them believe that humans are changing the climate. And only about a third of that number think it's an urgent problem. Now, we've been working on this for 30 years. I think we have to recognize that we need to step up our game because we cannot win with 46%. It's just impossible. So in communications, your first principle is have a simple message that you repeat that everybody says till you're sick to death. So what is our simple message on how humans are changing the climate that we all use all the time that we know works? And the answer is we don't have it.
You may be wondering why you're sitting in the New York City Bar Association building. You haven't heard a lot about climate change and the law today. And I'd like to just talk a little bit about what we're up to. We're hosting this conference primarily because we believe that it's time to get something done on climate change. It's time to stop the nonsense. And we believe as lawyers that the best way to do this is on a comprehensive level and on a national level. But for many of the reasons you've heard today, nothing seems to be happening in Washington on this. And we also know that nothing is going to happen on this unless the public demands it. And unfortunately, pretty much the silence has been deafening up until now. We've learned something today about why there hasn't been a lot of progress on climate change. The problem of climate change is quite abstract. It's distant, both in terms of time and in terms of place. People are hardwired psychologically to worry about what's going to be on the table for dinner tonight. They're not really hardwired to worry about what's going to evolve over the next several decades into a crisis. And most of all, I think people are paralyzed, as we heard this morning, by the immensity of the problem. But the good work that many of you here in New York have done makes it very clear that we're not powerless. New York's corporations, environmental groups, academic and religious institutions, and state and local governments have done enormously wonderful things in the state of New York. And so what we're trying to do at the Bar Association is we're trying to harness the energy that you folks have created, and we're trying to focus that energy into what we hope will be a common and a coordinated message that we can rally around. And that's what brings us to the next phase.